Welcome to the Author's Corner. I'm Ethan Yang. It's no secret that America has a lot of big companies. It's also no secret that America has a very interesting history when it comes to companies in terms of our opinions on large companies. For example, the late Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis famously wrote an essay entitled The Curse of Bigness, stating that large companies in and of themselves are bad for being large. This conversation is especially relevant today with many multi-million dollar, multi-billion dollar, and some trillion-dollar companies existing today, raising a lot of questions on whether or not they are serving society. And in many cases, some people might say that they are ripping us off. Professor Anthony Gill, who is a contributor with AIER, as well as a visiting scholar back in this summer, is also a professor at political economy at the University of Washington, wrote an article about this exact issue back in August. He joins us today to talk about this exact issue. Professor, it's great to have you.
Greetings, Ethan. It's good to be here. Love being here.
Yeah, of course. And for the audience, some of you may have not been able to have this privilege, but while Professor Gill was at AIER, our campus in Great Barrington, he brought along a great friend, a puppet, actually. I don't know if you'd want to open up just by telling us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I didn't bring Puppet here today, but it's just my way to bring a lot of joy to teaching. That a lot of times when we teach economics or political economy, it's all graphs and equations and formulas, and it becomes very sterile for a lot of students. So I like to lighten things up and give them something to remember. Oftentimes I'll use the puppet and students will walk out of class and tell other people, it's like, you wouldn't believe this crazy professor, he brought a puppet to class who was doing all this kind of stuff. And the next question that somebody asks is usually, well, what were you talking about in class? And what's interesting is that the students will tell you exactly what they were talking about then. It's a great way to actually trick them into learning and having them teach other people, which I think is one of the best ways to actually get an education, is to be able to explain what you've learned to other people.
Yeah, of course. So, and certainly tricking people into learning, that's definitely a new one for me. But this article you wrote certainly is full of not only important basic economic information, but definitely touches on an important cultural matter that is around today when it comes to large companies such as Amazon, Starbucks, Facebook, what have you. But before we jump into the details of that, why don't we first start off about talking about why big companies are good in any sort of sense of the imagination? Why should we even tolerate having large companies? Do they even give us any benefits at all?
Yeah, in contrast with Justice Brandeis, who saw big companies as inherently bad, bigness is bad. Actually, bigness is a measure of success. One, it says that, the business has a product that lots and lots of people want. That's really good. But more importantly, it helps us to become more prosperous by leveraging all those things that Adam Smith talked about in The Wealth of Nations. Is that in order to be more productive, you need a division of labor. You need people to specialize in certain tasks so that they become better at those tasks. They learn how to do them. But in order to enhance the division of labor, you need to extend the market. You need to be able to trade with a lot of different people. And when you start to open up broader and broader markets, you're able to specialize, and that kind of results in bigness. Certain companies, certain entrepreneurs figure out ways to reach broader audiences, and they become, very technically proficient in doing certain things. Like Starbucks is excellent at making coffee. They started out as a small, hippie shop here in Seattle back in the, I think, early 1970s, maybe late 1960s, and people liked their product. And they said, well, if people like our product, more people should be able to enjoy that. They were able to trade with a lot more people, become more specialized in what they do, create a product that a lot of people like. And it's wonderful. I mean, there's Starbucks all over the place. And the fact that they're big is a testimony to their success. People like them, so they keep going back. Yay, verily.
So this also brings us to another basic economic concept, which is economies of scale. Large companies have the capacity to produce things for cheap, and also they have the capacity to innovate more, research more, just by the fact that they're large. Like Amazon can give us the prices and the and the quick shipping that we need, I'm not really sure if some random company down, and some company you never heard of might have that capacity.
Absolutely. Those capital resources, when you start pooling that capital, you can put it to good use to make things more efficient. That's part of the, drive for, profits. You want to make things more efficiently, make things at a lower cost so that, more people can afford them. You can sell it to more people, and then you end up bringing in a lot more revenue. And that's really great. Hey, I often tell my students who, bemoan all these large companies, like Amazon is like, oh, Amazon is such a horrible thing. Well, they innovated a lot of ways to deliver things to people rather quickly, to get those products to you almost on the same day that you order it. And I just asked them, we're in the middle of a pandemic here, a program coming up on almost 2 years of this thing. Could you imagine having to live in this kind of pandemic lockdown environment without having the ability to get a lot of things delivered to your door? That would be really, really difficult. So, 2 cheers for bigness here in my book.
And that also brings us to another thing when it comes to large companies, and that is actually pretend I'm a first-year student in your class, right? So we just talked about how Amazon can get you the prices, Starbucks can get you cheaper coffee. And let's say I came up to you and I'm like, Professor, I understand that these economies of scale, like this all makes sense, right? Amazon can get me the products for cheap, Starbucks can get me the coffee for cheaper. So, but they're ripping us off because Starbucks can get me the coffee for $2, but they're charging me $5. I want to pay $2 if that's what Starbucks can actually get it to me. But why are they charging us that $3 is this pure profit that made off the backs of hardworking people like me, hardworking students like me?
Yeah, I get this a lot, especially with bigger companies. We'll explain why bigness might be one of the big factors here later on. But yeah, there's a sense that I'm getting ripped off when I go and purchase something there because they're just, they're really rich companies and they must be making that money from something, and it must be the high prices that they're charging me. I wrote this article because I did have a student who is one of my undergraduates, so probably a decade ago, who was complaining about being ripped off by Starbucks when he purchased iced coffee. Every time he went to purchase an iced coffee, I don't know, it was $5 or something. And they would put a lot of ice in the cup and then pour some coffee in it. And then he would drink it. And eventually he said, wait a minute, there's not a lot of coffee in here. There's a lot of ice. If I just ordered regular coffee, there'd be a lot more coffee and ice. I don't drink the ice, usually throw out the ice. So they're really ripping me off here. The interesting thing that I pointed out to him is that he kept going back to get a coffee for $5, the iced coffee. He really likes iced coffee. And I said, well, how could you be ripped off if you knowingly go back time after time after time? It must mean that you value that iced coffee at a price of $5. Because at a certain point in time, maybe the first time you go say, oh, $5 for an iced coffee. Boy, that sounds really good. I'm going to try it. They pour you the coffee, you drink it. It's, oh, there's not enough coffee here. It's not worth it. Yeah, I might get it if it was $2 or something, but yeah, not for $5. But if you drink the coffee, you say, okay, that went down a lot quicker than a 16-ounce hot coffee, because there's probably not 16 ounces of coffee in here, probably about 10, maybe 12 ounces. And you go back again and pay it, that says you enjoyed it for at least $5, or you're not thinking about what's going on here, right? That if something is not worth it to you, but you keep going back and buying it, something's wrong, right? That might be your problem, not the company's problem.
And another thing you bring up in your article is the idea of gains from trade. So maybe, the coffee's $5, but most consumers are probably willing to pay a lot more for coffee, especially in certain situations. Obviously, our preferences change upon the circumstances, but you talk about how, you're actually getting a lot, that $5, even though it might not be $2, it's a lot less than what it could be. And that in itself is a gain that you're getting from this transaction with Starbucks. Can you explain that a little bit more for us?
Yes, I'd love using this example to explain a core economic concept, gains from trade. The idea is that somebody else has something that's very valuable to you, and you have something very valuable to them, and you find a way to get together and you trade for it. In this case, you're trading a cup of coffee, of iced coffee, for a bunch of green rectangles that have the president's picture on it. Starbucks likes those for some reason, right? They like those green rectangles with ones and pictures of George Washington. You know, they're nice. And so if you both agree that, okay, you give me the coffee and I give you these 5 $1 bills, we're all better off. That's known as the gains from trade. We're both better off, or at least not worse off. And what is critical to understand here in the gains from trade is that it occurs because we have different reserve prices. So a reserve price in economics means that for the consumer, it's the highest price that you would pay to get some type of good. So you might really like iced coffee and say, wow, I would go out and buy an iced coffee for $5, right? If it's $6, I wouldn't buy it. If they charge me $4, well, that's great. But $5 is my reserve price. I won't go up anywhere above that. The seller in a transaction has what we call a reserve sell price, and that's the lowest price that they would sell something at. This is oftentimes determined by the material cost, the labor, all those kind of other costs. Plus, they want to have some kind of profit margin, be it 2%, 5%, 10%, whatever it might be. And so let's say that Starbucks has a $2 reserve sell price. And they say we can't make iced coffees at a profit anywhere below $2. So $2 needs to be the minimum. Well, if I go walking up there and say, hey, I really love iced coffee, I'd love to give $5 for that iced coffee, the difference between those two reserve prices, my willingness to pay $5, their willingness to sell it to me for $2, is what we call the gains from trade. And that's $3 right there. The world will be better off when we make this trade by $3. Now, the question is, how do we divide this up? From my vantage point, does it really matter? If I'm willing to spend up to $5 to get a cup of coffee because I think I would enjoy it that much, and they sell it to me at $5, well, great. I got what I wanted, and Starbucks is better off because they captured $3 in the gains from trade. If, on the other hand, I go there and say, oh, I'm willing to pay $5 for a cup of coffee, but they say, oh, you know what, we'll sell it to you for only $3. Well, that's $1 above their reserve sell price. So they keep $1 in the gains from trade, and I keep $2. We're both kind of better off there. In fact, I tend to be a little bit better off than they are. And that's a really key concept to understand what's going on here. Those differences in reserve prices and the gains from trade that actually occur.
And so what you're saying is that, you know, we're paying $5, but a lot of us would actually pay a lot more than $5. And in fact, if you probably go to a smaller coffee shop, you might be paying upwards of $6, $7. I don't really drink that much coffee, but I'm assuming Starbucks is giving you a good deal. That's probably what's going on. And Starbucks itself, I think you made this example in your article, is that, you know, sometime when it's late at night and you need something right now, you're willing to pay maybe like $10, right? Because you might need to do some project that's due tomorrow. Starbucks is always going to be $5 most of the time, right? They're not gonna say like, oh, well, we notice you're willing to pay $10, so we're charging you $10. No, that coffee is always going to be $5.
Yeah, and that's really important here. And this is one of the things that stuns my students when I say this. So the thing is that reserve prices, especially for consumers, are not always the same. They're not the same between you and me. So you might not like coffee very much. I love coffee. I'd pay a lot for coffee. Some other people would not. But also reserve prices vary according to different circumstances for individuals. So in the morning, I need a jolt to get up. Oh, I would pay maybe $7 for a cup of coffee. If it's, you know, I have to get some sleep and I want to go to bed, I'm not going to pay anything for coffee. My reserve price might go down to $0. In fact, it might even be negative. Starbucks couldn't pay me to drink coffee because I want to have a good night's sleep. But as you mentioned, there are some nights where I have to grade midterm exams and they're due the next day and it's 10 o'clock at night and I'm starting to sag. And I'm like, man, I really could use some coffee now. I would pay $15 for a big cup of coffee. And I go down to my local 24-hour Starbucks and I march in there and I scream out, I would be happy to pay $15 for a cup of coffee. I'd let the world know. I'd let the baristas know, the store manager. And then I walk up, I get the cup of coffee, and they say, oh, it'll be $3. Wow. So I'm capturing now the difference between what I paid and my reserve price of 15. That's $12 in gains from trade. I got a great deal. I oftentimes tell my students, or I ask them, am I ripping off Starbucks? Because I'm willing to pay $15, but out of the graciousness of their heart, they're only charging me $3. I'm taking a lot more in the gains from trade. Again, if it only costs them $2 to make, they charge me $3. They get $1. I'm still capturing at that moment $12 in the gains from trade. Am I ripping them off? Should they have charged me more? And the answer is, well, does it really matter? Both parties are better off. So, who's ripping off who here? Some days you might not want coffee and you're paying a lot for it. You kind of feel like you're ripped off. Other days you might really want it and they're not charging you all that much. You might be ripping them off. In either case, I actually don't think anybody's ripping anybody off. We're both making each other better off, which is great.
And that's certainly a good note to end that certain discussion on. But let's move into the more substantial topic, and I guess the topic that's really go around these days is, why do you think there is so much suspicion and so much vitriol that's directed at places like Starbucks, Amazon, what have you, when it's clear that, at least from an economic perspective, that they're providing a very helpful service to society, and these preferences, they're subjective, right? There's no really objective price, right? You can want it more one day, want it less one day, right? The prices go up and down, what have you. There's all sorts of preferences that are being weighed in on this. But why do you think so much people really just simplify it down to they're ripping us off, they're exploiting us, we hate them?
Yeah, that is something I didn't touch upon in my article, but it's really critical. And it oftentimes goes to this buy local movement. And I've written a little bit on that before. The idea is that, well, you should keep your money local, support the local entrepreneur, the local small coffee shop, the mom and pop who's making these kind of things. Even though locally, if you're not, a big corporation, your costs might be a little bit higher and your prices might be higher. On top of this, you might not actually be all that better. Right? Starbucks makes a consistent cup of coffee that's pretty good. Some people like it, other people don't. I've been to local mom and pop coffee shops that are horrible. Right? So maybe they aren't that good and they're a little bit more expensive, but people still like that local thing. And I've puzzled over this for a long time, and it kind of takes us a little bit away from the dollars and cents side of economics and more toward the human relations side. Glenn Lowry, an economist who is at Brown University, wrote a really great paper, Relations Before Transactions. That before we engage in transactions with one another, we have to understand who we're dealing with. Do we trust the other person on the other side? I think people like to buy local because they see the mom and pop who are selling those items every day, the bakery items, the coffee and that kind of things, and they interact with them. They see them in the grocery store, and they have more than just a relationship of selling and buying. It's friends you say hi to, and that is important because it allows us to build trust between individuals. As a company gets bigger and bigger, as it tends to scale up, we lose a little bit of that relational characteristics, right? The person who runs Starbucks is sitting in some high corporate office, all fancy, way out in Seattle, way on the other side of the country from Massachusetts. And we don't know that person, and we don't know if we can trust that person. So we tend to be a little bit more suspicious. Now, major companies kind of know this thing, and they often try to put on a human face. One of the reasons why a lot of businesses like Starbucks do things like sponsoring fun runs or having a day in the community where they plant trees or give to charity is to try to build some of that trust. And I often tell people this, that, like Starbucks is a big corporation, it's faceless. I go, yeah, but the workers there live in your community. The store manager does too. And the store manager on, weekend is out there helping, volunteer at the local, county fair or the local art fair that your city might be having in order to kind of build that relational trust. It's still pretty difficult, though, especially in larger cities where you see a lot of the same stores time and time again. And if you don't come across the people all the time, they do seem like a faceless corporation. You don't trust them. You don't know if they're really going to be giving you the fair amount in those gains from trade. So that, I think, is what we need to focus on. And I don't think a lot of economists spend a lot of time on that. We can model out the gains from trade with equations and graphs and color in all the squares and circles and triangles underneath those graphs to show you the benefits of all these kind of transactions. But we don't oftentimes focus on the softer things. How do we build those relations before the transactions? How do we build trust? And for those of you who are in larger corporations, those kind of public relations are actually pretty important and should always keep that in mind. It's not just the dollars and cents; it's the connecting with other individuals.
Mm. And a lot of these hostilities and suspicions make for really good political fodder, especially for opportunistic politicians. And this is very much in their interest to really stoke these angers and suspicions in larger companies so they can build up political support, and it might even translate to regulation. And they're not saying that maybe some regulations are necessary, maybe some are not. But you do mention that politicians really do feed off this energy when it comes to enacting regulations, using it to build up political support. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, politicians are good at leveraging the scary and unknown. And when a crisis arrives or when there's problems looming on the horizon, we need to turn to an authority figure to set everything right. And not surprisingly, if it's your job to set everything right, you might even kind of want to play upon those fears that, oh, it's a giant corporation trying to rip me off. What can we do to make them control the price? What can we do to have them keep the prices down to what is fair? Economically, it's a difficult thing, right? Because our reserve prices are different and they change all the time. So it's really hard pinpointing what the actual fair price is. But again, you as a consumer, you want a lower price. So the politicians know that, and they can oftentimes promise those things. One of the great ironies that I noted at the end of this piece that I wrote for AIER was that the folks who who are more likely to rip us off actually tend to be politicians, because they oftentimes can force us to buy a product that we don't necessarily want. We have to pay taxes. Just try not paying taxes and see what happens. Yeah, I have to pay taxes, and those things go to buy a lot of public goods. Some of these things I like. National parks are really nice. Other things like, a lot of defense equipment and nuclear weapons, I might not like that much, but I'm forced to buy them. And in that regard, I tend to be getting ripped off. In the case with, my student, I told him is that, hey, you keep going back voluntarily and buying that cup of iced coffee. No one's forcing you to do that. The government isn't telling you to do that, much the way that government tells me you have to buy national defense system to protect us from a Canadian invasion. Well, I don't want to do that, but I have to.
From the gas station's $1 too. You can just go there.
Yeah, there you go. And so, it's the fact that you can voluntarily exchange with other people and walk away from it. It tells you you're not getting ripped off. But if you are in a situation where politicians make you purchase something or provide you with things that you might not necessarily be wanting, that might more be the case of being ripped off. And it's ironic because those are the individuals we oftentimes turn to protect us from being ripped off. I should mention the story with my student did have a happy ending, though. I mentioned that, hey, you're doing this voluntarily. You think you're being ripped off. Why don't you just ask them to give you half of the ice that they normally do when they pour you their iced coffee? See what happens. And the barista at Starbucks said, oh yeah, no problem. We'll just cut down the amount of ice and got more coffee, and everybody was happier. Didn't take much to do that, just a little simple negotiation and asking. And in the world of free market transactions where people can get gains from trades and benefit from these interactions with one another, that kind of stuff is really beautiful, and we should celebrate that.
And it's also a very good hack that maybe our listeners can take away is if you go to Starbucks, just ask for a little less ice, get yourself some more coffee. But to end, let's explore this quote of yours. that you ended your article with. It's a very elegant quote, and it reads, "There's an irony to all of this. A person can be ripped off if they are coerced to purchase things at a cost above their reserve buy prices. This cannot happen in a free market with voluntary exchange, but it can happen via government intervention and coercion. My taxes go to pay for a large number of services, including regulatory agencies, that I do not value and which deleteriously affect my ability to capture gains from trade. The larger the scope of government grows, the more likely each and every one of us is being asked to pay for things that we do not value. That is the real ripoff." Can you please explain to end what has been a very great interview?
Yeah, as I mentioned a little bit earlier ago, there are certain things that I like government providing for me, and I'd be happy to provide for them. State parks and nice roads and things like that I like. But there are a lot of other things, including as I mentioned, lots of nuclear weapons. I don't like that. A lot of these foreign wars, I don't like us spending our money on that, but I got to purchase that. I don't really have a choice. And that's the problem when you concentrate power and can force people to do this kind of thing. Oftentimes, people can get into what we call rent seeking. They go to the government to force them to make a law to direct resources their way. And me as the taxpayer have to pay this thing, even though I didn't have any kind of say in the matter, any voluntary say in the matter. And sometimes large corporations do this. In fact, it's quite often that large corporations will understand that they can leverage the government power to direct resources that way. That might, in that respect, lead to some of our distrust of larger corporations. But in a free market where we're celebrating the gains from trade and we can do this voluntarily, there's nobody getting ripped off. It's only when we bring power and coercion into the equation, and that's government. If we want to prevent ourselves from being ripped off, what we need to do is shrink the size of government and get back to more of these voluntary transactions in the free market.
Professor Gill, thank you so much for taking the time to give this very insightful and very enlightening talk on such a very important and pertinent issue today.
You're welcome. Great being with you.
Yeah, of course. Professor Anthony Gill is a professor of political economy at the University of Washington and a distinguished senior fellow with Baylor University's Institute for the Study of Religion. He's also a contributor at AIER. He was a former visiting scholar back this summer, and he got his PhD in political science from UCLA. If you liked what you heard, make sure to keep up with AIER's content on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, as well as check out our website at aier.org. To support more cutting-edge research and researchers like Professor Gill, make sure to become a donor. All that information and more can be found at aier.org. Thank you.